Okay, so about a year ago, I was at this pre-NAMM party with my buddy Jeremy, and we were basically there to demo a couple of guitar interfaces. He was on bass, I was on guitar. We were just gonna have a good time. And so we finish all of this demoing, and we're basically like, okay, the hard part of the night is done. Now we just get to chill and relax. We don't even have to think about music for a while. But right as we're about to chill, Jeremy turns to me and he tells me, because he notices in this group of people, one particular man standing there. In my mind, I don't really think anything of this, because there's a bunch of people here, and I think my main focus is just trying not to get too much sensory overload. But for some reason, my buddy Jeremy, he's just really fixated on this guy, and he can't figure out why. But then he finally does, and he turns to me and he goes, "Mike, I know that guy. That's a really famous bass player." Now, here's the thing. I like to pride myself on being what I like to sometimes refer to as a really annoying guitar player, and that can mean a lot of different things in a lot of different moments. But when it comes to being able to recognize different people in my industry, a lot of times I tend to take way too much pride in being able to, if someone pulled up Rolling Stone's top 250 of all time, I like to think I'd know at least something about most of those guys. Realistically, when it comes to bass players, I can always admit that I know next to nothing. And I know I need to do better in that regard, but I figure in the moment, Jeremy's probably gonna figure it out eventually. So I go about my festivities. And while we're doing this, Jeremy, every 10 minutes, he keeps going, "Mike, I know that was a famous bass player. I know for a fact that dude over there in the hat, he was a famous bass player." And I'm like, "Well, okay, Jeremy, okay." But he keeps doing this and he keeps doing this. And eventually he has like his light bulb moment. While we're eating dinner, he stands up and he goes, "Mike, I know who that is. That's Marcus Miller." And he gets out of his chair and he sprints. Now, like I said, I'm no bass aficionado. I have all of these gaps in my head of bass players' names I need to know. But for some reason, that name Marcus Miller, it rung out to me because I was like, I've heard that before. I've definitely heard that name before somewhere. And then it hit me, Sire and their line of basses. They had like the Marcus Miller line. I'm like, of course. So it's essentially mystery solved. I must be a genius, right? For remembering all of that about that Marcus Miller guy having these line of basses. But let me just log into Google real quick to double check that it's the same Marcus Miller, that I'm not completely wrong. So I log in and I look up Marcus Miller and I figure out that he's way, way more than just the guy from a certain line of basses. This dude has played with everybody. And friend, I do not say that in any way hyperbolically. I come to find out that this guy is probably one of the greatest bass players to have ever lived. And in this moment, I am so happy for my friend. I mean, Jeremy's this incredible bass player. He's getting to meet one of his heroes. He's probably getting to talk with him and play with him as we speak. And I go about my day and I'm like, this was a really cool moment. I was just really, really happy for my buddy. And later as the night progressed, I actually got to talk to him. I was like, "Jeremy, what was it like getting to hang out with Marcus Miller?" And he goes, "Mike, this guy was an absolute legend. He had nonstop good things to say about this homie." And I was like, "Dude, that is so cool." And he goes, "Mike, did you get to talk to him?" And I was like, "No, I mean, that was a couple hours ago. He's probably left. He has like Marcus Miller things to do." And he goes, "No, Mike, he's right in that room right there. He's upstairs. You can go talk to him." So I stand up, I get out of my chair, and I'm still in a little bit of disbelief because I'm like, I thought he had left. Like, this has been a couple of hours. I walk over to the other room and there he was. And I just introduced myself and I'm like, "Hi, Mr. Miller. My name is Mike. I'm a wannabe guitar player. I'm not necessarily from California." I was probably rambling a little bit, but the more we get into it, we actually start talking about different guitars and different gears and different philosophies and stuff like that. And I could quickly tell a couple of things. One, that he was one of the nicest dudes I've ever met. But our conversation, where it was headed, I knew eventually I had to ask him about Sire, and the conversation got on that topic. And that's where it got really interesting, because he started to tell me a little bit more about the philosophy behind like Sire guitars and what they were doing and about their basses. And at this point, this all really intrigued me because I had never actually played a Sire guitar before. I had heard of them. I knew they were like semi-cheap guitars that people, for some reason or another, seemed to really like on the internet. Like, there was a lot of hype behind them, especially in like that just post-Squire price range. But they weren't necessarily anything on my short list of one day I have to make a video talking all about that guitar. But things would change, and I think because I never forgot my conversation I had with Marcus Miller and just how nice he was to me and just how much I could learn from a living legend. So I was like, let me actually give these guitars a shot. So I did, in a guitar store one time, and I didn't necessarily like it. I tried the Sire S7. I was like, I don't really think this thing is for me. I tried It just wasn't for me. But then I was like, let me give this thing one more chance, and it was for me. I actually ended up originally going with their L7, which is like their Les Paul sort of thing, and I really liked it because it had P90s, and I was going through a whole P90s things with Les Pauls at the time. More on that in a different video, but I decided to give their S7 a try again after trying that Les Paul thing, and I think what really got the ball rolling in my mind about that specific guitar was knowing that at $649, it was kind of this price range that Fender no longer really occupied. It wasn't even like they were directly competing with Fender. Obviously, every Strat kind of is, but with just how high quality it was and the specific price range, in a lot of ways, I thought to myself, this thing might scare Fender just a little bit. But then I thought to myself, okay, this is like apples and oranges. Fender is apple, Sire is oranges, and maybe Ibanez is like grape tomatoes. And I held to that exact sentiment all year when I was playing this guitar until this guitar, well, one of the pots is broken and I have to get it fixed, but that's a different story. Until this year's exact NAMM, almost 1 year later, when I'm looking at all of the new models for all of the different guitar companies and I see what Sire has going on, and I'm like, oh, S7? And what is this? An S10? Not only is it just like a different model, but this is the first ever guitar from that company that I've seen in a higher price range like this, one that occupies the exact same price range as like the Fender American Performer series. So it prompted me to ask the bigger question of like, will this thing actively live up to the hype? Well, there's only one way to find out. So Mr. FedEx just came through, and I think it's time we actually see what's going on here. So friends, this right here is the Sire S10, and it does happen to have a couple things that I didn't necessarily expect. It's got a swamp ash body, a hard maple neck. None of that necessarily surprised me. But here's the thing, the neck is actually way flatter than I expected. The older version, the S7, had a 9.5-inch radius, which is pretty close, if not exactly, to what like Fender Player 2 series is doing right now. But this right here, 12 to 14-inch compound radius. So the other thing that caught me off guard just a little bit that's different is the pickups. These are Seymour Duncan psychedelic single coils, which I've never used, I've never even heard of up until now, but from the research that I did, they're supposed to give like a more 60s vibe, which since they're using the term psychedelic, I assume is something like a Hendrix vibe, but I don't think any of that jargon actually matters until we see what it's made of and try it out, so let's do it. So when I first took this out of the box, it definitely felt a little bit heavy, not heavy for a Les Paul, but heavy for a Strat. I don't know the exact weight. And the other thing is that I was partially worried about the feel of the neck because I've been playing a lot of like 60 style Strats recently with like the 7.25, 7.5-inch fret radius. And it's like, once you get used to that, it's a completely different feel, but this feels good.
Well, I've played a Sire bass before, but for like 30 seconds. That's pretty sick.
It's swamp ash.
Okay.
I literally,
it feels like ash, like how light it is.
You say it's light.
Yeah, it's so light, dude.
You say it's light.
Very light.
I literally went off earlier about how I think it's like a little heavy for a Strat, but I don't know. I don't just say this to say this. I mean this when I say this. I might be becoming a maple neck guy on Strat. I've been a rosewood guy my entire life. I think it's the way that this body looks. I know it's not roasted maple, but it's like a hard maple, I said. At the end of the day, what are my final thoughts? Well, let me sum it up like this. There will clearly always be a market for non-Fender Fender alternatives. Like, we know the people who want Fenders, they will buy their Fender Strats, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. I like Fenders too. But when it comes to something like this, like the S10, the more I realize that fact, I start to think about this as less of like a Fender competitor, but more of like in competition with the GNLs and the PRS Silver Skies, depending on where their price ranges are at right now, and ultimately probably Sire. I've heard a couple people kind of allude to it, and now that I've played it, I think I kind of echo the sentiment of this guitar is really going to be in competition, I think, with the S7s of the world, and seeing for those people who already like this brand and like these guitars, are these upgrades, the pickups, the body, and finally coming with a hard-shelled case. Thank you for that. Worth someone looking at this as their definitive alternative to the Fenders. And that's going to be interesting to see, especially from people who've already played or bought S7. But at the end of the day, I don't think it matters what I think. What matters is what you think. So please let me know. Have you played a Sire S7? Have you wanted to play the S10? What did you think of the S10 Triple S or the SSH as a whole? Please let me know in the comments. Anyways, thank you so much for watching this video. This honestly was one of my most anticipated guitars of the year, simply because they announced it so far in advance for when they actually started like pre-orders and coming out with it. So being able to see it in person, I've been wanting to do this for a while. If you want to know anything else about the Sire S10, I got it from the homies at Sweetwater. The links are in the description. It's one of the best ways to support the channel if that's something you want to do, or if you're just curious about this or the Champ or any of the other gear that I used in this video, make sure to check out those links. Also, thank you so much to all my patrons. There's some extra exclusive content on there if you want to join the community. These are my bandmates, Jeremy, one of the best bass players around. Like and subscribe if you had a good time, and most importantly, like most important of all, have a fantastic night. Completely almost forgot to say, that same night that I met Marcus, I also ended up meeting one of possibly the greatest guitar players on the planet, who is listed on Rolling Stone's 250 list, but you guys don't want to hear that story, do you?